Adwoa couldn't stop smiling as she moved around the house in Accra, checking on every little detail for her wedding. The invitations were sent, the caterers confirmed, and the flowers arranged just the way she wanted. Everywhere she looked, there were reminders of the life she had dreamed of, the beautiful white gown hanging in her room, the rings sparkling on the dresser, and Kwame, her fiancé, waiting patiently to start their future together. She felt light, almost like she was walking on air, surrounded by love and excitement. Her family seemed genuinely happy for her. Her parents fussed over last-minute preparations, offering advice and warm encouragement. Her friends laughed with her, sharing stories of past weddings and teasing her about the honeymoon. Everything felt perfect, like a scene from a movie. Yet, in the midst of the laughter, Adwoa noticed her sister Efua. There was something in her eyes she couldn't quite read, too sharp, too guarded. Efua's smiles never reached her eyes, and there was a subtle tension in the way she lingered near the decorations, offering help but giving off a strange, quiet energy. Adwoa, caught up in her own excitement, didn't pay it much attention. For now, nothing seemed out of place. The streets of Accra buzzed with wedding chatter, and the city itself felt alive with anticipation. Adwoa's heart was full, her mind dreaming of the day ahead. She felt safe, loved, and ready, but little did she know, a storm was quietly forming just beyond the edges of her perfect world. Kwame was walking through a quiet side street in Accra when he saw Efua waiting near the corner, her eyes darting nervously. She motioned for him to come closer, and he hesitated for a moment. Something about her tone made him uneasy, but he followed anyway. Once they were out of earshot, Efua leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "Kwame, there's something you need to know about Adwoa," she said, her words heavy with meaning. Kwame frowned, feeling a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Efua glanced around as if the walls themselves might be listening, then took a deep breath. "Before you met her, Adwoa had a relationship. It wasn't just a fling, Kwame. She had a child." Her words fell like stones, each one hitting harder than the last. Kwame's heart thudded painfully in his chest. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "A child?" he repeated, disbelief clear in his voice. "Are you sure? How is that even possible?" Efua's eyes glinted with a strange satisfaction, but she masked it with a look of concern. "I wouldn't lie to you, Kwame. I'm telling you because you deserve to know the truth before you marry her. She never told anyone. Nobody knows. And now, well, you need to think carefully." Kwame felt his mind spinning. He had trusted Adwoa completely, believed in her honesty and their love. But now, a seed of doubt had been planted, twisting and growing with every heartbeat. He tried to imagine Adwoa keeping such a secret, but it didn't make sense. Adwoa had always been open and warm, sharing everything with him. Yet Efua's words carried weight. There was a pause, heavy and suffocating, as Kwame struggled to reconcile the woman he knew with the accusation he had just heard. He looked into Efua's eyes, searching for a crack, a hint that this was a lie. But Efua's gaze was steady, almost too steady, and the words she had whispered kept echoing in his mind. Kwame walked home in a daze, the city's vibrant streets suddenly feeling cold and distant. Every memory of Adwoa now carried a shadow of suspicion. He wanted to dismiss it, to laugh at the absurdity, but a tiny voice in the back of his mind whispered that maybe, just maybe, there was truth in Efua's story. He didn't know what to believe anymore, and the closer the wedding approached, the heavier his heart felt. A storm had begun to stir, one that threatened to unravel everything he thought he knew about love, trust, and the life he was about to build with Adwoa. After her conversation with Efua, Kwame began to change. At first, it was subtle. He was quieter than usual, distracted during their conversations, and often seemed lost in thought. Adwoa noticed it immediately. She tried to brush it off as pre-wedding stress, but the distance between them grew each day. Where he used to hold her hand without a second thought or laugh freely at her jokes, now he seemed tense, careful with his words, as if measuring every sentence. One evening, while they were arranging the final wedding details, Kwame finally spoke. His voice was low, almost hesitant. "Adwoa, I need to ask you something," he began, avoiding her gaze. Before we get married, I need to know, was there ever someone else? A child." The words hit Adwoa like a sudden gust of wind. She stepped back, confusion and hurt flooding her. "Kwame, what are you talking about? You know me. I've never hidden anything from you. I've never." Her voice trembled as the shock sank in. She couldn't understand why he would even think such a thing. Kwame looked torn, his hands fidgeting with the edge of the table. "Someone told me things, rumors. I don't know if it's true, but I need to hear it from you." Adwoa's heart sank. She had trusted him completely, and now his doubt felt like a knife twisting in her chest. "Kwame, you have nothing to worry about. There is no child. There was no affair. I love you, and I have nothing to hide," she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. But her words didn't stop the whispers. Rumors began circulating in their community like wildfire. People who had once congratulated her now exchanged knowing glances, murmuring behind closed doors. The market vendors, neighbors, even distant relatives, all seemed to be talking. Adwoa felt their eyes on her wherever she went, a mix of pity and judgment she hadn't expected. Her cheeks burned with humiliation, and every step outside felt heavier than the last. At home, she tried to confront Kwame to reach him, but he seemed trapped between love and suspicion, unsure who to trust. Their conversations grew strained, filled with pauses and half-finished sentences. The vibrant energy that had surrounded their engagement was replaced by tension and unease. Adwoa felt herself shrinking under the weight of doubt and gossip, powerless to stop the storm that Efua had quietly unleashed. And all the while, the wedding she had dreamed of felt further and further away, threatened not by her own mistakes, but by a secret she had never even known existed. Adwoa tried to hold on to hope, telling herself that Kwame's doubts would fade, that the love they shared would survive any rumor. But Efua had a way of twisting words and planting seeds that grew faster than she could pull them out. She smiled at Adwoa, offering help with wedding arrangements, her voice sweet and caring. "Don't worry, sister, everything will be fine," she would say. But behind that smile, she whispered to anyone who would listen, neighbors, cousins, even a few close family friends, painting Adwoa as someone untrustworthy, someone who had hidden a shocking secret. The whispers turned into questions, and the questions turned into pressure. Relatives who had been excited about the wedding now started leaning toward caution. At family dinners, Kwame found himself cornered by uncles and aunts, their voices gentle but firm. "Kwame, we love Adwoa, but have you thought this through? Are you sure you know everything?" they asked. "We wouldn't want you to be hurt." Each comment chipped away at his confidence, and he looked to Adwoa with uncertainty, his eyes full of doubt she could feel deep in her bones. Adwoa felt trapped. Every time she smiled, every time she tried to speak to Kwame about her feelings, she saw the distance in his gaze, a shadow cast by the stories Efua had sown. She began hearing whispers herself when she walked through the streets of Accra, neighbors exchanging quick glances, friends avoiding eye contact, even shopkeepers murmuring behind counters. The world she had built, the life she thought she was about to start, felt like it was cracking all around her. Yet, despite the fear and humiliation, Adwoa refused to give in. She refused to let her happiness be stolen by lies. She spent long nights thinking, planning, trying to figure out how to prove her innocence to Kwame and the family without causing more pain. Her resolve hardened like steel. She reminded herself of who she was, a woman of honesty, of dignity, of strength. No rumor, no accusation, no family pressure could take that away. And so she faced each day with a careful courage. She continued planning the wedding, greeting relatives with polite smiles, and speaking to Kwame when she could, hoping he would see past the doubts. Every moment was a battle, but Adwoa knew that surrendering was not an option. Somewhere in the storm of gossip and family pressure, she had to hold on to the truth, her truth, and the love she and Kwame shared. It was the only way to survive the attack that Efua had so quietly and cruelly begun. Her world might have been shaking, but Adwoa refused to fall. She would stand tall, even if it meant facing everyone and everything alone. Kwame didn't know what hit him the day Efua brought the baby into the room. Adwoa had been busy with wedding arrangements, unaware of the plan unfolding right under her nose. Efua walked in holding a small bundle, a baby boy swaddled in a soft blue blanket. "Kwame, you need to see this," she said softly, her eyes fixed on him with a mix of feigned sadness and cunning. She handed the baby to him, and the moment he looked down, his breath caught. The resemblance was startling. The baby had the same shape of eyes, the same curve of lips, the same dark, glossy hair. Kwame felt a knot tighten in his chest. He looked at Efua, then back at the child, his mind racing. Could this really be true? Could Adwoa have kept such a secret from him, from everyone? The doubt Efua had planted before now exploded into a storm of confusion and fear. He felt betrayed, shocked, and unsure of what to believe. Adwoa arrived at the room just then, humming softly, carrying a tray of drinks for everyone. She froze at the sight of Kwame holding the baby. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest, a cold fear settling in. "Kwame, what's going on?" she asked, trying to sound calm, but her voice shook. Efua turned to her, smiling sweetly, the picture of innocence. "Oh, nothing, sister. Just showing Kwame something important," she said, her tone dripping with false care. Kwame looked at Adwoa, his eyes searching hers for answers. "Adwoa, is this true? Do you have a child?" His voice was a mixture of fear and desperation. Adwoa's mind raced. She wanted to scream, to push the baby away, to confront Efua, but her first instinct was to look closer, to find the truth hiding in the small details only she would know. And then she saw it, the tiny bracelet around the baby's wrist. A bracelet she had made herself for her first niece, now turned into a prop for Efua's lie. Her hands trembled as she reached for the baby, checking carefully. The stitchwork, the beads, the engraving, it was unmistakably hers. This baby couldn't be hers. Someone else had wrapped him in a familiar token, hoping to trick them both. Adwoa's mind cleared in an instant. Efua's carefully constructed story began to crumble before her eyes. She felt a mix of anger, relief, and determination, all crashing through her at once. Kwame's eyes followed hers, confusion softening into concern as he waited for her to speak. "Kwame, this isn't my child," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. "Efua is lying. She's trying to trick us." The baby cooed softly, oblivious to the tension around him, while Adwoa stood tall, holding on to the truth that only she could see. The room, filled with whispered suspicions and fear, now held a single undeniable fact. The deception had been exposed, and the real story was just beginning to unfold. Adwoa couldn't ignore the chaos any longer. The rumors, the whispers, and now Efua's baby stunt had shaken everything she had worked for, and she knew she needed proof, clear, undeniable proof. She turned to Kwame one evening, her eyes steady and determined. "We have to do a DNA test," she said firmly. "I can't keep explaining myself forever. The truth will set me free." Kwame hesitated, torn between anger at Efua and lingering doubt, but he nodded slowly. Deep down, he wanted the truth as badly as she did. When Adwoa brought up the idea with Efua, her sister's reaction was immediate. Efua's face paled, and she stumbled over her words. "A DNA test? That's unnecessary. You're overreacting," she said, her voice too sharp, too quick. But Adwoa didn't flinch. She met Efua's gaze without fear. "It's not overreacting," she replied. "People are talking. You've taken this too far. If you're telling the truth, there's nothing to hide. But if you're lying, it's time to end this." The family was divided at first. Some were sympathetic to Efua, believing she might have a point, while others saw how far the lies had gone. But as the gossip spread through their community, growing louder and more harmful, pressure mounted. Uncles and aunts, neighbors, even a few family friends began urging Kwame and Adwoa to take action. "This scandal is too big," one elder said firmly. "A DNA test is the only way to clear things up." Finally, Efua relented, though her resistance was obvious. She protested quietly, claiming the idea was unnecessary, that it would ruin reputations. But the family insisted, and she had no choice. Adwoa arranged the test in secrecy at a small hospital in Accra, wanting to keep it private until the results arrived. The hospital staff were discreet, allowing them to conduct the test without anyone noticing. The tension was palpable. Every interaction between Adwoa and Efua now carried an undercurrent of suspicion, every glance a reminder of the storm that had been building for weeks. On the day of the test, Kwame stayed close to Adwoa, holding her hand and offering quiet support. Adwoa felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. Relief because soon the truth would be out, and anxiety because she had no idea how Efua would react when everything came to light. As she sat in the hospital room, watching the technicians collect samples, she knew that the moment of reckoning was near. The DNA test would either confirm her innocence or reveal a scandal even more shocking than anyone had imagined. But one thing was certain. Adwoa was ready to face whatever came, armed with the one thing no one could dispute, the truth. By the time they left the hospital, a quiet determination had settled over Adwoa. She had taken control of the situation, no longer a victim of gossip or manipulation. The stage was set, and soon, the lies that had threatened to destroy her life would be exposed for everyone to see. The day the DNA results arrived, the tension in Adwoa's home in Accra was almost unbearable. The whole family had gathered, some out of curiosity, others out of duty, but everyone felt the weight of the moment. Kwame sat close to Adwoa, his hand holding hers tightly, eyes darting around the room as though expecting a trap at any second. Efua stood across from them, her face carefully neutral, but the slight tremble in her hands betrayed her nerves. Adwoa took a deep breath as the envelope was handed over by the hospital staff, who had come in person to deliver the results. The room felt impossibly quiet, the usual chatter and laughter of family gatherings completely gone, replaced by a thick, suffocating tension. Everyone leaned in, eyes fixed on the envelope as if it contained not just a piece of paper, but the very fate of their family. Kwame looked at Adwoa, searching for reassurance. She gave him a small, encouraging nod, trying to hide the pounding of her heart. Slowly, deliberately, she opened the envelope, her hands steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. She pulled out the papers and unfolded them, her eyes scanning the results, her breath catching as she read the words that would change everything. The room held its collective breath as she looked up, the papers shaking slightly in her hand. It's not my child," she said quietly, almost in disbelief. "It's Efua's." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Kwame's eyes widened, his face pale, and he turned to look at Efua, whose carefully constructed composure was now cracking. The smile she had tried so hard to keep faded, replaced by shock, then panic. What? How is that possible? Efua stammered, stepping back. The family stared at her, the silence now thick and judgmental. Adwoa's parents looked stunned, their eyes shifting between the two sisters, finally understanding the depth of Efua's deception. Cousins whispered to one another, some shaking their heads, others covering their mouths in disbelief. The weight of Efua's lies had finally collapsed under the undeniable truth. Kwame's hand tightened around Adwoa. I don't know what to say, he whispered, voice trembling. He stopped, his words trailing off as the realization hit him fully. Adwoa squeezed his hand, offering silent reassurance. Efua's face crumpled as she sank into a chair, unable to maintain her pride any longer. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at Adwoa, finally admitting defeat, though not yet aloud. Around them, the room buzzed with disbelief and murmurs, but Adwoa stood tall, her dignity unshaken. The truth was out, and for the first time in weeks, she could breathe. The lies, the rumors, the whispers, all of it had come to an end. And in that quiet moment, as the family processed the shocking revelation, Adwoa felt a surge of relief and quiet triumph. She had been tested, humiliated, and doubted, but now, finally, justice and truth were on her side. The room seemed to hold its breath. For a few long seconds, no one spoke. Every eye was fixed on Efua, who now sat slumped in the chair, her carefully crafted facade completely gone. The weight of the DNA results pressed down on her, leaving her exposed in a way she had never experienced before. The whispers, the fake smiles, the subtle manipulations, all of it collapsed in an instant. She was no longer the sister with a hidden agenda. She was simply a woman who had let jealousy and envy drive her to terrible lengths. Tears streamed down Efua's face as she finally spoke, her voice shaky and broken. I did it, she confessed, barely above a whisper. I tried to destroy Adwoa, because I was jealous. I wanted everything she has, her happiness, her love, her life. I thought if I ruined her, I could take her place. Her words hung in the air, heavy and raw. The family's eyes widened in shock, their previous doubts replaced by disbelief and anger. Parents, cousins, and friends exchanged glances, realizing the full scope of what Efua had done. Kwame's face turned pale as the truth sank in. He had almost let doubt and fear overtake him, almost let a lie come between him and the woman he loved. He swallowed hard, feeling a wave of guilt and relief crash over him at the same time. Efua, how could you? He whispered, his voice tight. I almost lost her because of you. His hands shook slightly as he reached out to Adwoa, who stood quietly beside him, her expression calm but firm. Adwoa felt a strange mix of emotions: anger at Efua's betrayal, relief that the truth was finally clear, and compassion for the woman who had let her envy control her. She looked at her sister and spoke softly but clearly. Efua, I forgive you, but this can't happen again. What you did, it was wrong, and you have to face it. I won't let it touch my life anymore. Her voice carried the weight of dignity and strength, and the room seemed to recognize it, the tension slowly lifting. Efua buried her face in her hands, sobbing openly now, her jealousy and lies finally giving way to raw remorse. The silence that had fallen earlier shifted, replaced by the quiet realization of truth and justice. Kwame held Adwoa's hand tightly, leaning close to her. I'm so sorry, he murmured, his voice thick. I can't believe I doubted you. I won't ever again. The room remained quiet, but in that silence, the power had shifted. Efua had fallen and Adwoa had risen, not with anger but with grace. For the first time in weeks, the tension lifted, replaced by a fragile calm. The lies had been shattered, the truth revealed, and in that moment, Adwoa and Kwame finally felt free to breathe again, their love stronger and unbroken. The air in Adwoa's home had changed. The tension that had hung over the family for weeks had lifted, replaced by a quiet sense of order. Adwoa stood at the center of it all, calm, composed, and strong. Her shoulders were straight, her head held high. For the first time since Efua's lies had begun, she felt completely in control of her life again. The whispers and doubts that had tried to undermine her confidence now seemed powerless in the face of the truth. She had been tested, humiliated, and doubted, yet here she was, her dignity intact and her spirit unbroken. Efua, by contrast, sat quietly at the edge of the room, her head lowered. The disgrace was evident in every line of her body, in the way her eyes avoided meeting anyone. The family's disappointment was clear, and even those who had once supported her now kept their distance. Efua's jealousy and lies had finally caught up with her, and she had no one to blame but herself. It was a hard lesson, and one she would not forget, as everyone around her seemed to silently acknowledge. Despite everything, Adwoa knew forgiveness was necessary, for her own peace as much as for the family. She approached Efua slowly, speaking with a steady, calm voice. I forgive you, Efua, she said. But know this, I will never forget what you tried to do. You crossed a line that should never have been crossed, and the consequences were severe. Learn from this. Her words were firm, leaving no room for misinterpretation, yet not cruel. She offered a chance for Efua to start rebuilding herself, but the gravity of her actions would remain a permanent lesson. Kwame stepped forward next, his face serious but full of emotion. He turned to the gathered family, his voice strong and clear. I want everyone to know that I made a mistake in doubting Adwoa, he said, his eyes never leaving her. I was misled, confused, and almost let lies destroy something precious. Adwoa, I am sorry for questioning you, for letting fear take over. You are the woman I love, the woman I will marry, and nothing will ever change that. The room seemed to breathe again, a collective exhale after weeks of tension. Adwoa felt a wave of relief and quiet pride. She had stood her ground, faced betrayal, and emerged stronger. Kwame's words confirmed what she already knew. Truth and love had prevailed. Friends and family looked on, some nodding with approval, others with admiration. The power shift was undeniable. Adwoa was no longer the one under attack. She was the center of respect and truth, while Efua faced the weight of her own actions. In that moment, Adwoa realized something important. Life would throw challenges, people might betray, but strength, honesty, and dignity always shone brighter than light. She looked at Kwame, felt his hand in hers, and knew that together, they could face anything. The balance had changed, and the lesson was clear. Truth and love always won. The day of the wedding arrived with bright sunlight spilling over Accra, turning the city into a vibrant celebration. The streets were filled with the hum of excitement as family, friends, and neighbors gathered to witness the union of Adwoa and Kwame. Adwoa walked down the aisle in a flowing white gown, her face radiant with joy and confidence. Every detail had been carefully planned, but nothing could compare to the glow of triumph that surrounded her. Kwame waited at the altar, his eyes lighting up the moment he saw her. The doubts and storms of the past weeks felt distant, replaced by a shared happiness that was deep and undeniable. Efua was noticeably absent, a silent reminder of the betrayal that had once threatened to ruin everything. The community, however, seemed to rally around Adwoa, offering praise and admiration. People whispered about her strength, her grace, and her courage in facing the lies and humiliation without losing herself. Her parents beamed with pride, friends hugged her tightly, and Kwame held her hand firmly, his love and trust unwavering. Every glance, every smile, and every congratulatory word felt like a quiet victory over the shadow that Efua had cast. As the ceremony ended and the couple shared their first dance, Adwoa raised her glass to the gathered crowd, her heart full. She had been tested, hurt, and doubted, but she had emerged victorious. With each sip, she celebrated not only the love she had with Kwame, but also the strength she had shown, turning betrayal into triumph. In that moment, surrounded by joy, laughter, and admiration, Adwoa felt a profound sense of peace and accomplishment, knowing that no lie could ever take her dignity or happiness away.